Let me paint the picture for you. I live in a pretty normal apartment building in a busy part of the city. Nothing fancy, and my window faces a small courtyard with another building just like mine about 15 feet away. For 2 years, the window directly across from me was always closed with dusty blinds. The kind you see in places where nobody really lives. So I assumed it was storage or maybe an old person who never opened their curtains. Then 3 weeks ago, everything changed. It was a Tuesday night around 11 p.m. And I couldn't sleep because the heat was awful. So I walked over to my window, pulled the curtain back just a crack, and looked outside hoping for a breeze. That's when I saw the light across the courtyard. And standing there with her back facing me was a woman with long dark hair wearing a loose white shirt. Just standing still looking down at something on her table. I didn't think much of it, new neighbor I guessed. But here is where I made my first mistake. I kept looking, not in a creepy way, but because when you have stared at a dark brick wall for 2 years, a light is interesting, and your brain gets bored and looks for stories. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds just watching her stand there. Not hiding or leaning out like a weirdo. Just a guy in his own apartment looking out his own window. Then she turned around. And this is where real life hit me. Because in movies this is the moment where the girl waves and invites you over for coffee. But real life is not a movie. She looked directly at me, not a glance but a full direct stare. And her face was hard to read. Not angry, not happy, just calm, too calm. I froze with my hand still on the curtain. And I should have closed it right then. Smiled, nodded, and walked away. But I didn't because when someone catches you looking, your brain goes into a weird panic mode. Psychologists actually call this the chameleon effect. Where when you are caught doing something you shouldn't, your instinct isn't to run but to fit in and act normal. So I just stood there like an idiot holding the curtain. She walked toward her window slow steps, unlocked it, pushed it open, leaned on the sill, and then she smiled. Not a happy smile but a knowing one. The kind a cat gives a mouse before it plays with it. She said, "Can you help me?" And her voice was low but I could hear her perfectly. Because the courtyard echoed a little. And I remember my mouth went dry as I tried to say, "Sure," or, "With what?" But my voice cracked and I just nodded. She pointed to her table, the one she was staring at earlier, and said she dropped something behind her dresser. A silver ring from her grandmother that she couldn't lose. And the dresser was too heavy for her to move alone. So could I come over just for a minute? Now here is where the logical part of your brain is screaming at me. Stranger danger, don't go to a neighbor's apartment at midnight. You watch true crime videos, you know how this ends. But here is the thing about being a guy. Society tells you that you should be helpful. And if a woman asks for help and you say no, you feel like a coward. Plus, she wasn't scary. She was pretty and calm and her apartment looked normal from what I could see. A lamp, a chair, a rug, so I said yes. I put on shoes, walked down my stairs, crossed the courtyard, and went into her building where the hallway smelled like old wood and flowers. And her door was open just a crack, so I knocked, and she said, "Come in." The inside was normal, too normal, beige walls. A bookshelf with a few books. A small kitchen with clean counters. But no photos on the walls, no family pictures, no mess. And that should have been my second red flag because nobody has an apartment that clean when they have just moved in. It looked like a showroom where nobody actually lived. She was standing by the window pointing to a large wooden dresser against the wall. And I got on my knees and looked behind it with my phone flashlight, scanning the floor for the silver ring. Dust bunnies, a dead bug, no ring. So I moved the light left, right, nothing. And I said, "I don't see anything." She didn't respond, So I turned my head to look at her. And she wasn't looking at the dresser. She was looking at the lock on the door, and my heart dropped. I stood up fast, too fast, and hit my head on the corner of the dresser. And blood immediately ran down my forehead. Not a lot, but enough that I could feel the warm trickle over my eye. She looked at me and her smile finally disappeared. Now she just looked annoyed and said, "You're bleeding on my rug." Not, "Are you okay?" Or, "I'll get a towel." Just anger about a rug. That's when I noticed something else. The window she had opened to ask for my help was now closed and locked. She had closed it while I was on the floor, looking for a ring that probably never existed. I started backing toward the door and she stepped forward. Not fast, just one step then another. So I grabbed the doorknob and it was locked. She had locked it without me hearing. Maybe while I was hitting my head or maybe earlier. But I was trapped in a stranger's apartment, bleeding, with a woman who was no longer smiling. I asked her, "What do you want?" And she tilted her head like I was a slow student and said, "Here is the part of the story that still keeps me up at night." I looked past her toward her bedroom door, which was open just a crack. And inside that room I saw a pair of men's shoes on the floor. Big shoes, work boots. And they were muddy like someone had just walked in from outside. But we were the only two people in the apartment. Someone else was in there, and I didn't wait to find out who. I turned the lock, ripped the door open, and ran down the stairs through the courtyard, up my stairs, and slammed my door, locking every lock I had. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat against the door with a kitchen knife in my hand listening. The next morning I looked out my window, and her blinds were closed again, the window was shut. And I haven't seen her since. Psychologists call this the foot in the door technique, where someone asks for a small favor like moving a dresser. You say yes, then they ask for something bigger. And because you already agreed once, your brain doesn't want to seem rude, so you say yes again. And in my case, the small favor was coming over, and the bigger favor, I still don't know. But those muddy boots tell me I wasn't supposed to leave. Studies show that over 60% of people will agree to a stranger's request if it starts small, and that is not a guess. That is data from social psychology experiments where researchers went door to door asking people to put a small sticker in their window. Almost everyone said yes. And then weeks later, the same researchers asked to put a huge ugly billboard in the front yard, and half the people still said yes just because they had said yes before. That is what happened to me. I didn't go to her apartment because I was stupid. I went because my brain was tricked. One small yes led to another. And if I had not seen those boots, if I had not hit my head and felt the pain wake me up, I would have stayed and kept helping. The real turning point was when she got annoyed about the blood on her rug. Because a normal person would have been worried about the bleeding guy in their living room. But I was not a person to her. I was a problem, a mess on her floor. And when someone sees you that way, you are not safe. So here is what I learned. Never go to a stranger's apartment alone at night, no matter how nice they seem. If someone asks for help and the situation feels even 1% off, trust that feeling, because your gut is not dramatic and it is not overreacting. It is a survival tool that has kept humans alive for thousands of years. And if you ever find yourself bleeding on a rug and the other person cares more about the rug than you, run, do not walk, do not explain, just run. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later and I never saw the woman again. Sometimes I look online for news stories about that building. Missing people, strange noises. So far nothing, but I still check and I still keep my curtains closed. If you want to hear about another close call I had, that's still